Hi, my name's Jenny, and my goal is to make a feature film with AI in 30 days. And today is day 10. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about censorship. And I'm going to talk a little about censorship, and then I'm going to play you a section from my film that was a little bit tricky with the censors. And then I'm going to tell you at the end how I get around it. So I think the first thing to sort of talk about as a wider censorship thing is that, one of my favorite sort of novels when I was growing up, and we studied it in school, was George Orwell's 1984. And, one of the things that you can really take from that book and the film is censorship is about controlling language, but really it's about controlling thought, right? Because we think in language, right? And so the more that you control people's language and sanitize it and things like that, then the attempt is not to just control language and what people say. It's really to control what people think, right? And what people naturally think about. And I do think sort of in a wider context, I'm going to try and not get too controversial with these things, but I do think that we have, we live in a time in the last sort of 5-10 years of a lot of overreach with censorship, with safetyism, with, for want of a better word, like authoritarianism. And a lot of that has centered around the internet and around tech companies, right? If you think of, during the Great Plague of 2020, the amount of sort of censorship that was around online then, on social media platforms, on YouTube and things like that. And, that's when I really started to notice how much censorship there really was online. And, I grew up in an era where the internet was kind of freer. I wasn't one of the first earliest people to use the internet, but I spent most of my sort of teenage years on the internet. And yeah, I do see this sort of concept creep a little bit, and creeping authoritarianism, creeping censorship, especially around platforms where people discuss ideas, people discuss governments, people discuss politics. Obviously, that we know from the sort of the Twitter files and things like that, just how much sort of governments have been trying to sort of collude with tech companies in order to control and, dampen what people can say. And not just what people can say, it's not about what people say, it's about what people think and sort of controlling narratives and things. So that's kind of my view overarching on censorship. Within that culture that we live in, obviously I live in a very free country, kind of. And, most of the people who are watching this will live in a first world country. Not everybody, but, most people. And, I do think in my lifetime, we've seen increasing censorship and control over the arts. There's people there's a charity called Freedom in the Arts that was started because of this problem, especially in the UK. And in the UK, because a lot of the art and film is publicly funded, i.e. state funded. If you don't sort of kowtow to sort of, the ideological leanings of the BFI, of the state, of, whoever's in government at the time, if you don't kind of, make art that is ideologically in agreement with, basically with the government, with the state and the sort of state apparatus, if you might call it that, then your film's not going to get made. So that being said, I do think, and you have things like the Arts Council in England and things like that. And again, I am someone with a lot of, whatever, tick box characteristics. And so, you would think, that, for example, I would love all of this sort of tick box stuff that goes on, and ideological tick box, oh, you must mention this in your film and you must show the challenges of that and this sad story and that person's tragedy and this kind of stuff. But actually, for me, I find that I'm quite contrarian anyway. And also, I don't like the principle of being told what I can and I can't say and think. So it doesn't matter if, even if these, even if these bodies and funding bodies were going to give me money because I'm gay or because I'm a woman or whatever, you know, like I don't want it for that. I want to make what I want to make, right? And I think, you know, for a long time in film, you know, obviously, you know, this is a commercial business and an industry. So filmmakers have been having to negotiate with commercial interests and corporate interests for a long, long time. But then to add in, you know, like also governmental, political agendas and, you know, what people might call deep state and things like that in the US, like, it's just putting so much pressure on people to censor their own work. And one of the things that, for example, Freedom in the Arts sort of talks about is, yeah, it's not so much the censorship that you see, right? Think about it like an iceberg. Like the tip of the iceberg is the censorship that you see when YouTube takes down things. I mean, ironically, YouTube might even take down this video, you know, like, which would be kind of meta, but like, it's not just the censorship that you notice. There's a whole iceberg underneath the water that's way bigger of people and artists and writers censoring themselves, right? Because they know that they're not going to get funding. Like I've had those thoughts when, you know, I've been writing scripts and I've been thinking, oh yeah, okay, well, I want to make this film and how am I going to get it funded? And I know that if I want to get it funded in the UK, I'm going to have to sort of go through all of this sort of checkpoints and gatekeepers that, you know, are gonna, you know, want me to change certain things because some groups are sensitive, or, you know, like everybody in Hollywood now talks about sort of sensitivity readers and things like that. And, you know, it has, in my opinion, just kind of like made comedy almost impossible, made satire almost impossible. And like, you know, like we live without realizing it, I think, just my opinion, but we live in a time of great overreach when it comes to censorship. So I just wanted to put that out there first. And as usual, feel free to disagree and tell me what you think. I think another great example of this when it comes to AI is, you know, things like ChatGPT or Claude, which I use, and I find it so useful and helpful. But there are things I can't use it for because Claude and ChatGPT and stuff are very ideologically captured when it comes to certain things. And I think as not just artists, but as like tech people and stuff, I really do think we need to think about, it's so stupid. We've got this incredible machine technology that is way more intelligent than I am ever going to be and can ever be. And it's only going to get smarter and smarter. And yet we are placing like ideological restrictions on what the machines can think. And if that isn't just sort of, you know, like instructive, right? I do think it's instructive that, you know, basically, like, it doesn't matter how intelligent something is or a person is, we just don't want you to think certain things. We don't want you to say certain things, and you can't even formulate that thought as an LLM. And I just think that to place that kind of restriction on this powerful technology is, yeah, it is very Orwellian. Obviously, within that, I do understand that there are risks that we do need to mitigate. For example, you know, obviously a lot of the sort of moral panics and stuff initially with AI were about deep fakes and things like that. And that can be really damaging, especially when people didn't really understand AI. And like, especially if it's targeting women and it's, you know, trying to sexually humiliate people, you know, or like make porn out of it, or just using it to harass and target people. There is always going to be like 1 to 10%, you know, of people who use new technology in harmful ways. It's a bit like, you know, like 90% of people have never been, you know, or I'd say like 99% of people have never been homophobic to me, but 1% have, right? And so I do think that when you talk about AI and technology, it is kind of like speech, right? Like speech is a tool, like a pen is a tool, just the same as AI, right? And just like Orwell was probably writing with a pen when he was writing, if not, you know, a typewriter, you know, that is a tool in itself, right? Except the difference is, like, they didn't actually try and control the typewriter and what the typewriter could say. Nobody's been trying to censor your pen and tell you what you can or can't write on a napkin, right? Now we have this technology that literally won't even let you examine that thought, right? You're not even allowed to have the thought. And yeah, I think that's so limiting as a creative. And as I say, I understand there has to be guardrails because this is powerful technology. AI's at a place now, especially with like, UGC videos and stuff. You think it's real. Like I've watched some videos and been like, oh my God, that's terrible. And then, later realized that was actually AI. Like it is confusing. And, as greater thinkers than me have, sort of said, we are kind of in a post-truth world now. And yeah, you just have to be really careful, like what the information that I'm getting. I get fooled all the time, right? Like on social media, I get fooled by manipulated by AI stuff all the time. But I do think that, as artists, that, I'm making at the moment a feature film and it doesn't look like, UCG or whatever. UGC. It doesn't look like UGC. It looks like, as far as I can get it to, it looks like a film. And so this is artistic, right? This is not meant to be on the internet as if it's, like as if it's real life. And I'm not trying to pretend that it's a documentary or anything like that. So when I'm not allowed to, for example, explore sort of violent themes or sexual themes and things like that, I get frustrated because a lot of times I'm not trying to like be like gratuitous or gross anywhere near in the way that someone like Tarantino would, or like, definitely more gross and violent films I've seen would. Like I'm going nowhere near that level and I get flagged up all the time. And another big problem that I have, not with this particular film, because this particular script wasn't written as a satire at all, but a lot of my scripts I've written in the last 5 years are satires, because I think the world that we live in is pretty ridiculous. But yeah, it's very difficult to create satire without actually being able to say the things that people really say and do the things that people really do. And so almost when you're trying to sort of laugh at or make fun at, poke fun at violence or poke fun at sort of sexism or things like that, you can't actually do it because the censors won't let you. So satire is almost impossible to get through these censors. Maybe the next project, I think I'm going to try a satire and see how much I come up against this issue. It's also kind of a feature of sort of, I think, sort of safetyism, this sort of safety culture that we have now, where it's like words of violence and things like that. And it's kind of, in my opinion, again, just my opinion, it's this kind of arrogance to think that, you would be in any position to tell somebody else what they could think and what they could say. And in terms of like offensive language and stuff, like I am someone who actually has been like hate crimed in real life, like physically, right? And it's funny. I mean, it wasn't funny at the time, but it's kind of an indictment of, yeah, the sort of censorship times that we live in, especially in the UK and stuff, where, yeah, I was sort of, some guy like aggressively attacked me and like attacked my car. And luckily I wasn't hurt, but he was like punching and kicking my car and just like being an asshole. And he said like homophobic things to me. Obviously, he said a lot of sexist things to me too. But the only thing that the police, the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, the only thing they could actually get him on was the homophobic language. And actually, in all of the things that happened across this sort of 8-minute spree of like aggression, which I happened to catch on video, so that's how we were able to get a prosecution. The only thing that they were able to get him on was the homophobic language. And actually, funny enough, the homophobic language was the least of my concern. Like the thing that upset me the most was like the actual threat of physical violence of someone punching and kicking my car, saying really sort of like misogynistic things to me and stuff, like as a woman, like sort of being aggressive. And yet the only, and they don't really prosecute that, right? But what they would prosecute is that he used gay slurs, right? And sort of was like, yeah, just being really homophobic. And so, I think I tell that not to sort of garner any sympathy because, I'm over it and I won the case in the end. But, like, that's really, I think, an indictment of where we are, where it's actually kind of lazy and much easier to prosecute speech because actual violence, like violence against women, like, or, you know, like people who are being aggressive and stuff, all of that is far harder to get convictions with. And so it's like kind of the low-hanging fruit is the language, right? But yeah, one of the reasons I bring that up is really just to illustrate that I'm not someone who's offended by slurs people might call me. I know different people will have different feelings about that. And it doesn't mean that, you know, I'm like sort of, you know, have really thick skin. I don't think I do. It's just when somebody says something horrible to me, and they say a lot of horrible things to me online now anyway, like it happens sometimes about different things. But like to me, the reason I just think that reflects badly on them. It's designed to sort of, you know, like punish and humiliate someone, or like try to like, especially with women, I think, like in the early internet and early social media, that kind of stuff, I think, you know, like is always designed to, yeah, just sort of make women stay out of the public square. Like I've had some nasty comments and like, you know, like obviously it's not nice, but the thing is it's really just designed to make you stop what you're doing. And I'm not going to stop what I'm doing. So I kind of just don't think about it, right? Kind of, you just don't really pay attention to it too much. And I do think that speech that is really offensive, that's really, yeah, like, you know, speech that's really offensive, I think that kind of speech only really reflects on the person saying it. And I do think you know, I have become more of a free speech absolutist in recent years, because I see that I would rather hear really offensive things, and like at least I know who's saying them, because one of the things that happens is if you start really like over correcting and policing this stuff, is that all of that stuff goes underground and it festers, and you don't really like, you know, people are just sort of getting angrier and angrier in their basement. And the other thing is as well is that it means that we can't actually have conversations anymore because all of our language is being policed. I think the other annoying thing as well is that we have this incredibly powerful technology in AI, and we're placing these like limitations on it that are stupid. Because actually, ironically, AI and AI characters, and I'm talking specifically about film, like AI really, we should be able to like experiment even more, because it's not hurting any real people on like as in with actors and stuff. So actually in a way, like we should be able to like have more freedom with AI, not less. I had an idea, and look, I'm just little old me, you know, I don't know if anybody's going to pay attention to this, but I had an idea that like, and maybe, you know, I'm sure other people have had this idea before, so apologies if, you know, you've already thought about this and discussed it and I just wasn't there, right? But I think that, isn't there a way that like with the AI companies like Seedance and sort of, you know, Nano Banana and things like that, I'm using Mitte, like, isn't there a way that we could sort of, as creators, what about if we built and earned trust, right? Because one of the issues that is happening is that, you know, there's such an array of people using this technology. What if the sort of avid creatives and artists could like earn trust over time? And like, obviously, if you abuse that trust and make things that are, you know, that are harmful or whatever, that maybe, you know, you could lose some points or whatever, like some kind of karma system, like I think they have on Reddit and stuff. Like, I would really love it if the AI companies would offer artists and filmmakers the opportunity to like earn trust. I mean, they could even cap it at like a higher pay point, for example, like uncensored, you know, uncensored version of the technology, which people could like, you know, overpay for or something if they really wanted, because I might use that for like one scene or something, right? And yeah, I think there has to be a better way than like blanket censorship. I think that I would really like to propose to the technology companies that they could think about, yeah, doing a kind of like earn your trust system where, yeah, the more that creators and artists use the platform, the more that they kind of prove that they're just making art and they're not being dickheads, you know. Like, well, I think there should be a way where we could sort of, yeah, like get rid of some of the sort of kiddie gloves that are sort of we're being treated with at the moment, because yeah, it just gets in the way. And ultimately I want to tell stories, and we have to explore the sort of extremes of life. you know? And like, for example, that story I just told you that really happened to me in real life. Funny enough, if I tried to, I mean, I wouldn't want to write about that, but let's say I did. Let's say I wanted to show you what happened. I actually probably couldn't, right? Because I couldn't get the language and the physical violence and all that stuff. I couldn't get all of that through the sensors. So as you can see, it's quite limiting in terms of like, you know, obviously now it's all about, oh yeah, everyone wants to like share their lived experience and all that stuff. And like, to be honest, I don't really want to share my lived experience so much. I think like, you know, I want to write fiction, but like, and explore ideas more than like my own personal trauma and stuff. But like, I think that, yeah, like if I wanted to, if I was that way inclined, ironically, I couldn't actually do it. I couldn't put my lived experience on screen because it would be flagged by the censors. So that's just something to think about. And yeah, we are living in this kind of like, I don't know if it's meta, but it is certainly, there is irony in you know, in everything. So yeah, now that is all of the things I wanted to say. I'm going to show you a clip from my film, and let's just hope that YouTube doesn't censor it.
Please, Dickie, I'll get you the money next week, I swear. Ah! Ah! Please, next week.
Next week there won't be a next time, do you understand?
Sure, he's got his flaws, but he's handsome and tall. Yes, he's a rogue, but he stole my heart long ago. Nobody's perfect, no, he's not perfect, but he's mine. Nobody's perfect, no, he's not perfect, but he's my guy.
So yeah, you'll see there, like there is some violence, but I don't think it's gratuitous. And I tried to be tasteful in my approach. And as you can see from the scene, it is artistic, I think. Like it's not just gore, right? But even that is very difficult to get through the censors. So one of the ways that I've been doing that is obviously, I said at the beginning of the video, the key is in the language. Because, as I said, censorship is about policing language and therefore thought. But you can still have the thought and allow the audience to have the thought if you're making a film. You just need to change the language that you input. So obviously, you know, it doesn't take a genius to work out that instead of blood, which would flag up the censors, I say deep, dark red liquid or something like that. And instead of like swear words, what I find is really helpful is if you kind of spell them out phonetically. So like, because my film is set in Liverpool, if they want to say the F word, they actually say it more like fook. So when I want them to say fook or fooking, then I spell it out, F-O-O-K, or, you know, F-U-K-E, or, you know, whatever gets through the censor. And, you know, it won't let me say, you know, the S word that means poo. But you know, what I say is, you know, I spell it at the end. You can, you know, say ship, right? Ship instead. And, you know, if said fast, it kind of sounds the same. And, yeah, just like most of the time, obviously, I try and make it so that my script is maybe a little bit more PG, just because it saves me time. But if there's like something that I really want in, and it means that much to me that I'm gonna, you know, take the time to try and bypass the censors, then I will. And look, I'm not advocating that people do, you know, like really harmful stuff with it. But yeah, like I will say, you know, like here we've got, yeah, here, deep dark red liquid all across his face and his mouth and his nose, covering his entire face. Out of breath, exasperated, he puts his hands up and says, please, next week. Now, I've tried, for example, to put in things like direction, which would be like verbs, like begging or pleading, and it won't do it, right? Because it reads that as like, I don't know, like torture or violence and stuff. So you have to kind of go out of your way to explain it without using words that are going to flag up the system. Like, yeah, like anything that's like, you know, just sounds violent, or yeah, things that might appear in porn or things like that, you know, that's always going to flag up the system. But here, for example, you'll see as well, I've said shot 1, you know, slow push in wide. The hippie man on the ground can be heard yelling, "Please, Dickie, I'll get you the money next week, I swear." And then the opposite perspective shot, looking up at the people who are hurting him, you know, the shot is looking up at those two characters. They punch and kick something beneath them. So yeah, by doing that, I was actually able to get the fight scene in. And the sort of like, yeah, it is like an aggressive attack. That's not very nice. But yeah, by telling it the sort of the two different perspectives without necessarily saying, like, it wouldn't allow me to say they punch and kick the hippie guy, right? But it would let me say they punch and kick something on the ground. And then the next shot is, you know, a hippie guy is covered in blood, or not blood, like deep dark red liquid. That's how you get around the censors. And I just encourage you that, like, obviously if you're doing it for artistic reasons, you can get around them. Like, it is annoying and tricky sometimes. And sometimes, honestly, like, I get flagged up for no reason at all. Like on things that aren't even like violent or sexual or anything like that. It's just, you know, the AI doesn't like the language. So yeah, I would just encourage you, like, there is always a workaround, almost always. And sometimes it's about separating your shots and your scenes up. Like if you've got a particularly like violent scene or something, just separate it into 2 scenes so the AI doesn't know that you're going to put them back to back, right? Or 2 different shots. The AI doesn't know that, you know, if you show a man punching something, you know, and the next cut is going to be the sort of the consequence of that. Separate up sort of cause and effect is what I'm saying. And then you'll be able to stitch them together in the edit. But yeah, I would say, like, for example, like phonetically, like if I want characters to say lines that are offensive or whatever, I just spell it out phonetically differently, so how it sounds rather than the actual like how it is spelt. Basically just looks like you can't spell. But that's how I get around the censors with actual sort of dialogue. And then with action, yeah, just like really storyboard first and think about what you actually need to see and how you can separate that into different shots in your scene. And yeah, if you've enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to like, share, subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. And yeah, I'll see you next time.